In this last section, before we summarize, we're going to write a longer snippet at the REPL and briefly introduce the with statement. We're going to fetch some text data for some classic literature from the web using a Python standard library function called the URL open. To get access to URL open, we need to import the function from the request module within the standard library urllib package. Next, we're going to call URL open with the URL to our story. We'll be using a Python construct called a with block to manage the resource returned by the URL, since under the hood, fetching the resource from the web requires operating system sockets and such like. We'll be talking more about with statements in a later module, but for now it's enough to know that using a with statement with objects which use external resources such as this is very good practice to avoid resource leaks. The with statement calls the URL open function and binds the response to a variable named story. Notice that the with statement is terminated by a colon, introducing a new block, so we indent 4 spaces and create an empty list which ultimately will hold all of the words from the text. Next, we open a for loop which will work through the story. Recall that for loops request items one by one from the term on the right of the in keyword, in this case story, and assign them in turn to the name on the left, in this case line. It so happens that the type of HTTP response represented by story yields successive lines of text when iterated over in this way, so the for loop retrieves one line of text at a time from Dickens's classic. Note also that the for statement is terminated by a colon, because it introduces the body of the for loop, which is the new block and hence a further level of indentation. For each line of text, we use the split method to divide it into words on white space boundaries, resulting in a list of words we call line words. Now we use a second for loop nested inside the first to iterate over this list of words, appending each in turn to the accumulating story words list. Finally, we enter a blank line at the 3 dots prompt to close all open blocks. In this case, the inner for loop, the outer for loop, and the with block will all be terminated. The block will be executed, and after a short delay, Python now returns us to the regular triple arrow prompt. At this point, if Python gives you an error, such as a syntax error or indentation error, you should go back, review what you have entered, and carefully re-enter the code until Python accepts the whole block without complaint. If you get an HTTP error, then you were unable to fetch the resource over the internet and you should try again later, although it's worth checking that you have typed the URL correctly. We can now look at those words simply by asking Python to evaluate the value of story words. Here we can see the list of words. Notice that each of the single quoted words is prefixed by a lowercase b, meaning that we have a list of bytes objects where we would have preferred a list of strings. This is because the HTTP request transferred raw bytes to us over the network. To get a list of strings, we should decode the byte stream in each line into UTF-8 Unicode strings. We can do this by inserting a call to the decode method of the bytes object and then operating on the resulting Unicode string. The Python REPL supports a simple command line history, and by careful use of the up and down arrows, we can re-enter our snippet. When we get to the line which needs to be changed, we can edit it using the left and right arrow keys to insert the requisite call to decode. Then, when we rerun the block and take a fresh look at story words, we should see we have a list of strings. We've just about reached the limit of what's possible to comfortably edit at the Python REPL, so in the next course module, we'll look at how to move this code into a Python module where it can be more easily worked with in a text editor.